The rain hammered against the windows of the small Veterans Affairs office in Richmond, Virginia, as 89-year-old Colonel James Whitmore sat alone in the waiting room. His weathered hands trembled slightly as he clutched a manila folder containing documents he had kept hidden for 79 years. The fluorescent lights flickered overhead, casting shadows across his deeply lined face, a face that had seen horrors most Americans could never imagine. Across from him sat Sarah Chin, a 32-year-old military historian from Georgetown University, her laptop open and recording device ready. She had been trying to interview World War II veterans for her dissertation, but most had already passed. When she received Colonel Whitmore's cryptic email 3 weeks ago, she nearly dismissed it as another confused elderly person mixing up their memories. But something in his words stopped her. "I know why they really wanted Patton dead." Sarah cleared her throat. "Colonel Whitmore, thank you for agreeing to meet me. Your email mentioned General Patton and something about 12 German generals. Can you start from the beginning?" The old colonel's eyes, still sharp despite his age, fixed on her with an intensity that made Sarah shift in her seat. He opened the folder slowly, revealing yellowed papers, photographs, and what appeared to be military correspondence marked with coffee stains and age. "March 1945, he began, his voice stronger than she expected. "I was a young captain assigned to 3rd Army Intelligence under Patton. 24 years old, fresh-faced, thought I knew everything about war because I had read every military history book at West Point. Then I met him, the man they called Old Blood and Guts, and realized I knew nothing at all." Sarah leaned forward. "Everyone knows about Patton's drive across Europe. What makes your story different?" "What makes it different, young lady, is that nobody knows the real story of those 4 days in March when we crossed the Rhine. The history books tell you about the military victory, about the surprised Germans, about Patton urinating in the river like some kind of theatrical gesture. But they don't tell you what happened behind the scenes. They don't tell you about the 12 German generals who requested immediate transfer from the Western Front after those 4 days. And they certainly don't tell you why Supreme Allied Command tried to stop Patton, not help him, stop him, during the most crucial advance of the entire war." The rain outside intensified, creating a steady drumbeat against the building. Sarah noticed the colonel's hands had stopped trembling. He was somewhere else now, lost in memories that had haunted him for nearly 8 decades. "It started on March 22, he continued. "We were in a forward command post outside Oppenheim. Patton had just received orders from Eisenhower to wait, to coordinate with Montgomery's crossing further north, to not, under any circumstances, cross the Rhine without proper authorization and extensive preparation. Montgomery was taking weeks to plan his crossing, bringing up thousands of boats, building elaborate smokescreens, gathering massive artillery support. It was going to be the big show, the main event. Patton was supposed to be the supporting act. What did he do?" Sarah asked, though she suspected she knew the answer. Whitmore's lips curved into something between a smile and a grimace. "He gathered every available boat, pontoon, and inflatable raft within 20 miles. Then he called me and 5 other intelligence officers into his tent at 0200 hours. We were exhausted, hadn't slept in 3 days, and there he was, the crisp uniform, perfectly polished boots, 2 ivory-handled revolvers on his belt, looking like he had just stepped out of a portrait painting." The colonel paused, his eyes distant. "Gentlemen," Patton said to us, "I am about to disobey a direct order from the Supreme Allied Commander. I am going to cross the Rhine River tomorrow night with whatever forces I can gather, and I am going to drive so deep into Germany so fast that every Nazi general from here to Berlin will think the devil himself has come for them. Now, you can either be part of the greatest military operation since Caesar crossed the Rubicon, or you can request transfer to some quartermaster unit in the rear. You have 60 seconds to decide." Sarah found herself holding her breath. "And you stayed?" "We all stayed," Whitmore said quietly. "Not because we were brave. Not because we loved Patton, though some did. We stayed because in that moment, looking at that crazy, brilliant, arrogant son of a bitch, we believed he could actually do it. We believed he could change the course of history in 4 days. Outside, thunder rolled across the Virginia sky. Colonel Whitmore pulled out a photograph from his folder, a grainy black and white image of a group of young officers standing beside a tank, their faces barely visible in the dim light. "That was us," he said. "The night before we crossed. 6 men who knew too much and lived too long. I'm the last one left now. The others took their secrets to the grave. But I'm 89 years old, and before I die, someone needs to know what really happened during those 4 days. Someone needs to know why 12 German generals requested transfer. And someone needs to know why certain people in Allied command wanted Patton silenced forever." Sarah's pen hovered over her notebook. "Colonel, are you saying there was a conspiracy within Allied command against Patton?" Whitmore shook his head slowly. "Not a conspiracy. Something worse. Bureaucracy mixed with ego and a touch of fear. Montgomery was furious that an American general might upstage his carefully planned crossing. Some British commanders had spent months preparing their operation, requisitioning equipment, coordinating with Churchill himself. Then here comes Patton, ready to do it with fishing boats and sheer audacity." He pulled out another document, this one typed on official letterhead. "This is a decoded message we intercepted on March 23, just hours after we crossed. It was from German High Command to General Wilhelm von Schlieben, commander of the 159th Infantry Division. The message was simple: Patton has crossed at Oppenheim. Withdraw all forces immediately. Do not engage. Repeat, do not engage." Sarah frowned. "That doesn't make sense. Why would they order retreat without fighting?" "Because," Whitmore said, his voice dropping to almost a whisper, "they knew something we didn't know yet. They had been monitoring Patton for months, studying his tactics, his speed, his complete disregard for conventional warfare. German intelligence had calculated that if Patton crossed the Rhine and wasn't stopped in the first 12 hours, he would advance so rapidly that their entire defensive line would collapse. They were right." The colonel's hands trembled again as he pulled out a leather-bound journal. This belonged to Major Heinrich Kruger, a German intelligence officer recaptured on the 4th day. He kept meticulous notes about the American advance. Listen to this entry from March 24. He adjusted his reading glasses and began to read in halting German-accented English. Day 2 of Patton offensive. Our communications completely disrupted. Third Army moving at speeds we calculated impossible. General Rothkirch requested immediate transfer to Eastern Front, prefers facing Soviets over facing Patton. General von Obstfelder collapsed from stress, hospitalized. Morale among remaining commanders deteriorating rapidly. We are not fighting an army. We are fighting a force of nature commanded by a madman." Sarah felt chills run down her spine. 12 generals requested transfer in just 4 days? Whitmore nodded grimly. 12 confirmed requests in our intelligence reports. 3 more we suspected but couldn't verify. These weren't cowards, understand. These were experienced Wehrmacht officers who had fought on the Eastern Front, who had survived Stalingrad, who had commanded divisions against overwhelming Soviet forces. But 4 days of Patton broke them completely. He leaned back in his chair, suddenly looking every one of his 89 years. And that's when things got really ugly. On March 25, the 3rd day of our advance, I was called to decode an urgent message from SHAF headquarters. It was addressed directly to Patton. The message ordered him to halt immediately, consolidate his positions, and wait for Montgomery's forces to catch up. It threatened court-martial if he continued advancing. What did Patton do? Sarah asked. Whitmore's eyes grew cold. He looked at me, crumpled the message into a ball, and said, "Captain, our radio must be malfunctioning. I never received any message." Then he walked out of the tent and personally led a tank column 30 miles deeper into Germany before sunset. The atmosphere in the VA office shifted. Sarah realized she was no longer conducting a routine interview, she was documenting something that could rewrite military history. Colonel Whitmore pulled out a sealed envelope, its edges worn but the seal still intact. "What I'm about to tell you stays off the record until after my death," he said firmly. "I have copies of these documents in 3 safe deposit boxes across the country. My lawyer has instructions to release them when I'm gone. But you need to hear this now." He broke the seal carefully, removing several photographs. The first showed a group of Wehrmacht officers standing in what appeared to be a makeshift prison camp, their faces displaying not defiance but something far more disturbing, absolute terror. March 26th, 4th day of the advance, Whitmore continued. We had penetrated 93 miles into Germany. 93 miles in 4 days. The German army was in complete disarray. But that morning, something extraordinary happened. A German colonel arrived at our forward position under a white flag. He wasn't surrendering his unit. He was carrying a message from General Hans von Obstfelder himself. Sarah leaned closer. What did it say? The message requested a meeting between von Obstfelder and Patton. The German general wanted to discuss terms of surrender, not just for his division, but for 3 entire corps. Over 40,000 men, ready to lay down their arms. But there was a condition. Whitmore's voice grew quieter. Von Obstfelder would only surrender if Patton personally guaranteed they would become American prisoners, not Soviet ones. He said, and I quote from the translation I did myself, "We would rather face American captivity for 10 years than one more day fighting against General Patton's advance." That's incredible, Sarah breathed. If you're finding this story as shocking as I did back then, do me a favor, subscribe to this channel, hit that notification bell, because what happens next will make you question everything you thought you knew about World War II. The truth about those 4 days is just beginning to unfold. Whitmore continued, his fingers tracing the edge of a photograph. Patton wanted to accept immediately. 40,000 enemy troops surrendering without firing another shot? It was a military miracle. But when he radioed SHAEF headquarters for authorization, he received a response within 30 minutes. The answer was no. No? Sarah couldn't hide her shock. Why would they refuse? Because, the colonel said bitterly, accepting that surrender would have made Patton's advance official. It would have acknowledged that he had disobeyed orders and won. It would have proven that his method, rapid, aggressive, unconventional, was superior to the careful, plotting approach favored by Montgomery and others. More importantly, it would have given Patton leverage to continue advancing, possibly all the way to Berlin. He pulled out one final document from the envelope. This is a memo from March 26, marked Top Secret. It was sent from a British liaison officer at SHAF to his superiors in London. Sarah read the words that had been hidden for nearly 8 decades. Patton must be stopped. Not the Germans. Patton. If he reaches Berlin before the Soviets, the entire post-war political arrangement will be threatened. Sarah felt her hands go cold as she processed the implications. They were more afraid of Patton than of prolonging the war? Whitmore nodded slowly. Politics, my dear. Always politics. The Allied leadership had already agreed at Yalta that Berlin would fall within the Soviet sphere of influence. If Patton got there first, Stalin would have considered it a betrayal. The entire post-war balance of power depended on keeping Patton in check. So what happened with the surrender offer? Patton did something I'll never forget. He called us all into his command tent, myself and the other intelligence officers, and he was quiet. George Patton, quiet. That alone terrified us more than any German counterattack could have. He paced for maybe 3 minutes, then he stopped and looked at us with these eyes that seemed to burn right through you. The colonel stood up, steadier now than he had been all afternoon, as if channeling the energy of that moment 79 years ago. Patton said, "Gentlemen, I have been a soldier for 36 years. I have studied every great military campaign from Alexander to Napoleon. I have read Clausewitz in the original German. I know tactics, strategy, and the art of war. But today I learned something I never understood before. Sometimes the enemy isn't across the battlefield. Sometimes he's sitting behind a desk 200 miles away, terrified that you might actually win too quickly. What did he do? Sarah whispered. Whitmore smiled grimly. He sent a message back to SHAF saying he had received their orders and would comply. Then he accepted von Obstfelder's surrender anyway, but documented it as a tactical field decision made by a subordinate colonel. He advanced another 27 miles that day, capturing 2 major bridges intact and cutting off the retreat of an entire German panzer division. By nightfall on March 26, German High Command was in chaos. We intercepted 17 different communiques between Wehrmacht officers, all expressing the same panic. One message from General Kurt von der Chevalerie to his chief of staff particularly stuck with me. He wrote, "Patton moves like lightning, thinks like thunder, and fights like the wrath of God himself. There is no stopping him with conventional means. Request immediate transfer or authorization to negotiate independent surrender." And the other German generals? They were breaking. General Wilhelm Hasse suffered a complete nervous breakdown. General Edgar Feuchtinger abandoned his command post and was found 3 days later hiding in a farmhouse 50 miles behind his own lines. General Otto Elfelt requested transfer to Norway, in late March 1945, when everyone knew the war was ending, just to get away from Patton's sector. Whitmore sat back down heavily. But the real crisis came on March 27, the morning of the 5th day. That's when Patton received a direct order, not a request, not a suggestion, but a direct order signed by Eisenhower himself. He was to halt all forward movement immediately, pull back to defensive positions, and report to headquarters in person to explain his actions. Did he go? The old colonel's eyes gleamed. Not before he did one last thing that made 12 German generals wish they had never heard the name Patton. Sarah was on the edge of her seat. What did he do? Whitmore pulled out a map, faded and marked with red lines showing troop movements. March 27, 0400 hours. While everyone slept, Patton personally led a reconnaissance force 60 miles beyond our furthest advance. Just him, 2 tanks, 3 jeeps, and 20 hand-picked men. He wanted to see how far the collapse extended. That's insane, Sarah breathed. The commanding general leading a recon mission? Insane was Patton's specialty. We reached a town called Aschaffenburg by dawn. The place should have been heavily defended, it was a strategic rail hub. Instead, we found it completely abandoned. The German garrison had received reports that Patton was coming and evacuated during the night. 1,200 soldiers fled from a force of 23 men. Whitmore's voice grew softer, reverent. Patton stood in the empty town square as the sun came up, and I'll never forget what he said. He looked at me and said, "Captain, do you understand what we've accomplished? We didn't just cross a river. We didn't just advance into enemy territory. We broke their will. That's the greatest victory any commander can achieve, making the enemy defeat themselves." Then he did something nobody expected. He ordered us to document everything, every abandoned position, every piece of discarded equipment, every intelligence report about German officers requesting transfers. He had me compile a complete dossier of those 4 days, including the intercepted messages, the surrender offers we weren't authorized to accept, everything. Why? Sarah asked. Because he knew they were going to try to bury it. When we got back to headquarters that afternoon, Patton was immediately summoned to meet with Eisenhower. Before he left, he handed me the dossier and said, "Keep this safe, Captain. Someday, when I'm dead and can't be court-martialed anymore, make sure people know what really happened here." The meeting with Eisenhower lasted 4 hours. Nobody knows exactly what was said, but when Patton emerged, he was officially reprimanded for reckless conduct and ordered to coordinate all future movements with Montgomery. The rapid advance was over. Whitmore's hands trembled as he gathered the documents. But here's what they couldn't bury. In those 4 days, Patton's Third Army had advanced further, captured more territory, and inflicted more psychological damage on the German military than any comparable operation in the entire war. The 12 generals who requested transfers? That became a joke among the Wehrmacht. They started calling Patton's sector the Devil's Highway. German soldiers would rather surrender to any other Allied unit than face Patton's forces. And after the war? After the war, Whitmore said quietly, Patton became increasingly vocal about his disagreements with Allied leadership. He criticized the decision to let the Soviets take Berlin. He questioned the post-war policies. He made powerful enemies. Then, in December 1945, 8 months after those 4 days at the Rhine, he died in a car accident under circumstances that have never been fully explained. Sarah felt chills again. You think it wasn't an accident? The old colonel looked her straight in the eye. I think powerful men don't forgive being proven wrong. The rain had stopped. Through the window of the VA office, late afternoon sunlight broke through the clouds, casting long shadows across the room. Colonel Whitmore carefully placed all the documents back into the manila folder, his movements deliberate, almost ritualistic. Sarah broke the silence. Colonel, why now? Why wait 79 years to tell this story? Because everyone else is dead, he said simply. Eisenhower, Montgomery, the other 5 intelligence officers who were with me that night, the German generals, even most of the enlisted men who crossed the Rhine with us. I'm the last witness. And because 3 months ago, my doctor told me I have maybe 6 months left. Cancer. So I decided it was time. He stood slowly, steadier now than when Sarah had first arrived. You asked me earlier why 12 German generals requested transfer. The answer isn't complicated. Patton didn't just defeat them militarily. He defeated them psychologically. He moved so fast, struck so unpredictably, and pushed so relentlessly that they lost faith in their own ability to defend. That's not something you learn at military academies. That's not in any tactical manual. That's pure warrior instinct, and Patton had it in abundance. Sarah closed her laptop, knowing some truths were too important to reduce to mere data. What do you want people to remember about those 4 days? Whitmore walked to the window, looking out at the clearing sky. I want them to remember that sometimes the greatest obstacles aren't the enemy in front of you, but the bureaucracy behind you. I want them to know that Patton's 4-day dash across the Rhine changed the course of the war in ways that still aren't fully acknowledged. And I want them to understand that the 12 German generals who refused to face him weren't cowards, they were realists who recognized a force of nature when they saw one. He turned back to Sarah. I also want people to question the official narratives. History is written by committees, compromised by politics, and sanitized for public consumption. The truth is usually messier, more complicated, and far more interesting. Sarah gathered her things, then paused. The documents you showed me today will be released when I die, Whitmore confirmed. My lawyer has instructions. The full dossier, including materials I didn't show you today, will go to the National Archives and 3 major universities. Let the historians fight over what it all means.